But my mum, when she heard I was talking in Orkney, said, wear your good clothes. I'm wearing a good clothes. It's not easy to find out how long beekeeping has been in Orkney. You look at the archaeological records, you look at written records, there's very little evidence there to tell you. But we know that bees are associated with monasteries, and there was monasteries in Orkney for hundreds of years. We also know that bees have a strong connection with the Vikings. Vikings liked honey, they used it in their recipes, and they also liked to ferment honey into mead, and mead was an important part of their ceremonies, for example. One of the traditions that might have given us the term honeymoon is that when a Viking couple got married, they were gifted a month's supply of mead, and this was to give them good luck and help fertility. So I'll leave that with you. You might want to start that tradition again. Okay? The Orkney has, I think there's 35, 36 beekeepers, so a fair amount of honeybees. But Orkney is very famous as well for other bees, and particularly some rare species of bumblebee. I believe it's the great yellow bumblebee. I've been looking at the holiday home we're in at the moment. There's lots of bees, and I've been looking. I couldn't tell a great yellow, but there've been bonny bees, just the same. Okay, I'll pass them on.
I should say part of the reason why we've brought these bees with us, as opposed to bringing my own from Clackmannanshire, is that you are fortunate here in Orkney to have genetically pure bees, in a sense, bees that are still very, very similar to the native Scottish bee, and as a result it's not a very good idea for me to bring my bees from Clackmannanshire, which are much less true to the sort of Scottish bee archetype, here to the island, because it would influence the island's genetics. So that's the reason why these bees have been sourced locally as opposed to being brought on the ferry, which might in itself have been a bad idea, to be fair. So bees are a really interesting creature. They turn up around 120 million years ago from a species of carnivorous wasp. So these were wasps that previously had consumed a lot of meat as part of their diet and slowly begun to supplement that diet with nectar and with sweet materials from plants. They're a very successful animal. There are about 20,000 live bee species on Earth today. But they're a relatively new addition to the bee family. Honeybees turned up around 25 million years ago when they co-evolved alongside flowers for the mutual success of both those creatures. And the part of the reason why I find honeybees particularly fascinating is their social way of life. When we think about evolutionary biology, we tend to think of it as quite a selfish endeavour. You know, it's the individual organism, the individual animal out for itself and trying to put its own genetics into the next generation. But bees have gone very much the other way. They look at themselves as a collaborative species, a collaborative society, and they work together almost like one animal within a hive or within a colony. And they're very successful in doing that. One of the things that defines that term, we call it eusociality, highly social animals, is the collective breeding of young. So they look after each other's young quite readily, and also reproductive yielding. So one of the really fascinating things about this box of bees in front of you is that they've given up essentially their ability to have young of their own. Only the queen can lay eggs, and all of these female workers that you can see in front of you have actually given up their ability to have eggs and young of their own for the benefit of the collective colony. And I just think that's a really interesting approach to evolutionary biology and to life. Not to say too much on this slide, we'll come back to it in a second, but I just wanted to underscore to you that when it comes to honeybee anatomy, all of these different features you can see in front of you are evolved to give that social way of life a success. So it has three particularly large components: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And then we'll start to talk about some of these individual features that you can see there as the talk goes on. But each one of them has its own really important role to play in allowing the bee to live life the way that it does in a social, complex manner. So the social life of honeybees is not too dissimilar to our own in a sense, in that it is stratified and different. We have different roles in society and different roles in the world. Bees are very much the same. They're not all homogenous. They have different roles to play within their hives. And there are three in particular that I want to draw your eye to, three big categories of bee that exist within their little societies: the workers, the queens, and the drones. So the worker bees are infertile females. They are bees that do much of the heavy lifting around the hive. So tending to brood and nursing young, cleaning out the hive when there's deposits of dirt or mold or things that shouldn't be there, and also taking on a foraging role, so going out into the world and bringing back pollen, bringing back nectar from the local environment. They also take on guarding duties, so standing by the entrance of the hive and making sure that it isn't raided by competitive bees or raided by wasps as well. They have pretty short lifespans though, unfortunately, about 4 to 6 weeks in the peak summer months, and in the winter time that can go on just a little bit longer. So they're not particularly long-lived, unfortunately, as organisms. And that contrasts very much with the queen bee. So the queen bee is the only fertile female that you get inside of a colony, and her job is mainly to be just that, to be the fertile female laying eggs and helping to produce the next generation. And comparatively, she can live for up to 2 to 3 years. Sometimes even examples of 4 and 5-year-old queens can be found as well. And her role is to provide the next generation, to keep the hive going, and to provide workers that will go on to do most of the heavy lifting within that community. And then lastly, we have the drones, the fertile males. They, again, a bit like the queen, their job is simply to be that, to be the fertile male going out and engaging and mating with the queens and producing new workers and new nurse bees and the next generation of the hive. Something we'll come to in a little bit, but that's quite consequential, is that these bees don't engage in gathering, so they can't feed themselves. They don't go out into the world and get nectar or get pollen. They rely really heavily on their fellow hive mates, if you like, to feed them and to keep them going. I really wanted to sort of underscore this to you because it's a phenomenon that I personally just find really, really interesting. So fertile male drones don't come about the way that other bees come about. They come about by a process known as parthenogenesis. And some of you, if you sort of read the science sections of magazines or newspapers, you might have heard that term before. It's a phenomenon whereby a population of animals that are all female can suddenly and spontaneously produce a young within that community. So you see it in Komodo dragons, you see it in certain varieties of shark, you see it in aphids as well. It's a really striking phenomenon whereby the female community doesn't have a male within it, and as a result, a female can just spontaneously become pregnant and give rise to essentially to a little clone of herself. And this is how male bees come to be, through this process of parthenogenesis. Okay, so the way that we thought we might do this, we're just getting started, sorry. The way that we thought we might do this is to tell the story of a male bee. So to track the life cycle of a male bee throughout its hive and point out some of the kind of milestones that it goes through. So to start off, the male drone emerges about 24 days roughly after his egg was initially laid. And a bit like yourself, if you just had a 24-day nap, he's pretty hungry and he's got a real need for nutrition, and he relies entirely on his hive mates, on his female workers to provide that nutrition and provide that diet for him. There you go.
Okay, I'm going to look at the menu, the food available in a hive for the bees, and it depends very much which group of bees you belong to, the type of food that you get fed to you. So the first one we'll start with is honey. That's the one we all know. It's from nectar. It's a concentrated nectar. So the worker bees will go out and they'll collect the nectar. The nectar is collected in their honey stomach. Bees have 2 stomachs, one for digestion and one just for carrying things like nectar or honey. And then they'll come back to the hive with this nectar, and they will concentrate it by beating their wings, and that puts an airflow, and it'll get more and more concentrated and eventually become honey. Honey is a really strong, concentrated sugar solution. As you know yourselves, if you have honey, if you like honey, it's very, very sweet. It's about 82% honey. So it's 82 grams per 100 ml of honey. But it's not just sugar. It contains other nutrients as well, like vitamins, minerals, and amino acids. And these came from the nectar. Bees have preferences for nectar, and not all nectar's the same. And I only just found this out yesterday when I woke up and I thought, oh, I don't know anything about nectar and sugars, so I went on the internet and I found out that
I've taken my colleagues well, guys.
Oh, different flowers contain different nectars, the different concentrations of these different of these sugars. Bees prefer sucrose, so they want a warm nectar, bonny day, warm nectar that isn't too concentrated nectar, and mainly containing sucrose. They can digest that sucrose. They can't absorb sucrose directly, neither can we. So in their gut, they will break that sucrose down. The same thing happens in honey. So they will gather this nectar, concentrate it down, very rich in sucrose. They also, if you like, add enzymes, and it's through their saliva. So if you think, I heard a description once that when you're eating honey, you're eating bee spit. Well, you are, but it's good all the same. The enzyme is sucrase. Now, an enzyme, folks, is a biological catalyst. So those of you that drive maybe have a catalytic converter in your exhaust system. I don't drive, but I ken that they're there. And it changes things, it changes chemistry, it gets reactions going. Well, an enzyme is the same in biology. It is a catalyst that helps reactions take place. And sucrase will help sucrose break down to its component sugar. So sucrose is made up of two, what they call monosaccharides, glucose and fructose. So the enzyme splits the sucrose into its two sugars, glucose and fructose. Okay. An interesting thing that happens, just as an aside, is that some of that glucose is worked on by another enzyme called glucose oxidase, just another enzyme. And it converts a little bit of glucose into two things. Gluconic acid, which is an organic acid, a weak acid like vinegar that you put on your chips, and also hydrogen peroxide, which is a bleach. So very small amounts of these are produced in honey, and this helps honey keep. It helps stop bacteria from growing or spoiling the honey. Okay. Something I came across too when I was Googling was that you can get a sort of nectars that are harmful to bees. And two of the plants that we might have in our gardens contain neurotoxins that are harmful to bees if they have them in large amounts. And this is the azalea and the rhododendron. It can even kill bees if they consume too much or take too much of this nectar. Strangely or interestingly, bumblebees are resistant, and also interestingly, some people make honey deliberately out of azalea or rhododendron. In the case of in the Himalayas, the giant honeybee, the Nepalese giant honeybee or Himalayan honeybee, is used to make mad honey, which contains these neurotoxins. And it's because they have a drug effect. And it's sold as a medicinal product. It's supposed to be good for coughs. I imagine that it takes your mind off the cough if you're having hallucinations. I wouldn't recommend it. I've never tried it, but I would stay clear of the mad honey.
Can I make a small suggestion?
Yeah.
Maybe you could stand in front of that marker over there on the other side. It's just that you're currently off the camera and you'd want to prove to your mother that you wore your nice tie.
Oh yeah, that's very true. Hello, Mum. You wouldn't think I'd been a lecturer for 30 years. Okay?
She'll want proof that you wore it too.
She will, yes. So we're still on catering in the hive. And one of the other things that bees eat and is collected from nature is pollen. And not all pollens are the same. They vary in composition, but the main thing that the bees get from pollen is protein. Bees are made of protein. Their skin is made of protein. Their antenna is made of protein. They need protein. So they get it largely from pollen. And the composition of the pollen depends very much on the flower species. This, by the way, folks, is what pollen looks like if you look really, really close. So if you took some pollen or even took a pot of honey, and John has done this, taken honey, and he's centrifuged it, spun it very, very fast, and collected pollen. And then he looks under the microscope and sees the different shapes of the pollen.
If any of you come along tomorrow, we have that set up on our stall as part of the family. We have some microscopes set up with some pollen that you can take a look at if you want. It's quite a beautiful thing.
Pollen is tiny, very, very small. And so we want to give you a little bit of contrast. And can I move across there?
Go for it. Yeah. Directing traffic here suddenly.
Oh, yeah. I want to give you a contrast. This is Palmyra palm nut.
Yes.
So some things in nature are very, very small. Some things are huge. I was going to tell people this was a bee egg or from a very large bee, but I thought it might alarm you. So back on the catering, anybody here make sourdough bread during COVID? Yeah, 1, 2. I know John did.
Did indeed.
Yeah. Anybody just buy a sourdough from Tesco's? Yeah. Well, the bees make sourdough bread, and they call it bee bread. It's called other things as well. Other terms are used for it, but it's a very nutritious bee food that they make in the hive. So the bees take honey, they take pollen, they take nectar, and they take bee spit, and they mix it all together in a cell, and they let it ferment. And the fermentation is carried out by 2 types of organisms, a yeast and lactobacillus. Exactly the same type of organisms that you use in your sourdough bread to give you that nice bread. So, and the fermentation improves the nutritional quality. You get more vitamins and nutrients produced because of that fermentation. It gives you a very nutritious product. It also makes it more digestible. The fermentation will break the outer surface of the pollen because it's quite a hard outer surface, and makes the pollen more digestible and helps preserve it as well. So you can see a picture here of bee bread. Doesn't look very appetizing, but maybe does if you're a bee. These are lactobacillus. I spent a lot of years studying lactobacillus, and I did my PhD in lactobacillus. So they're my favorite bacteria. So I had to put in a photograph of them. And the last one I want to mention is royal jelly. Also very, very nutritious. And you get it, particularly if you're a queen. The workers will give you royal jelly, this wonderful, nutritious food throughout your life, especially as a larvae. The other types of bee, the workers and the drones, just get it for the first 3 weeks. And then they're put on the plain old honey and pollen. It's sticky. One of the benefits of that is if the bees add the royal jelly before the cap's put on this cell, it helps the little larvae stick to the bottom of the cell, so it means they don't fall out. So, and unlike bee bread is made by them piling everything into a cell and letting it ferment. This is produced in the body of the bee, the worker bee, and then they feed it from their mouth to the larvae. If a bee goes out to forage, a worker bee goes out to forage and finds a great source of nectar, they don't just keep it to themselves. They go back and they tell their friends, where this is, where this nectar is. Oh, we'll go to John's garden, found a great rhododendron bush there. We'll go to find the nectar, or maybe not rhododendron.
Not in my garden.
Not in your, you've got some good heather.
That's true.
Find some good nectar. So they come back and they tell the other bees. And the way they tell the other bees is this dance. It's called the waggle dance. Figure 8 there, and you saw a straight line in the middle of the two circles, if you like. That tells the worker bees, the other worker bees, the direction of that good source of nectar in relation to the sun. So they know the angle that they're going to fly off to, and the distance, the distance of the figure 8, how long it is, how big it is, tells you the worker bees the distance they'll have to travel. So they'll say, they might say, right, Scapa, you've got to go this angle, fly in this angle, and you go 2 miles that direction. Yeah. So anyway, drones become teenagers. They reach sexual maturity after 10 to 12 days after emerging from their cell. They hang about the colony, the hive, if you like, for a number of days, and they pop out every now and again, just fly about the area, getting their navigation sorted so they know where they're going, know where they are. I want to mention this. You might think it's not connected to what we're saying, but I think it's an important thing. It's of interest to people. And I worked in food science for a long time. And so I studied a bit about this. Honey is expensive. Even cheap honey is expensive. And some honey are more expensive by weight than gold. And so you can understand why crooks try to make money out of it. And they do. There's consequences to honey fraud. Safety. If you're adding something to honey and selling it to people, if you're a crook, you're not really caring the effect on the people. So there's a danger there. Eating quality of the honey. Keeping quality of the honey. The reputation of the beekeeper and the seller. Excuse me. And you could even put the beekeeper out of business. Two ways that fraudsters will commit fraud with honey. They might add water to the honey. They might add cheap sugar syrups, like corn syrup, rice, wheat, or sugar beet syrup, which are very cheap. They could mislabel the pot of honey. They could say that it's organic when it isn't organic. They could say it comes from Orkney when it didn't come from Orkney, etc. I want to show you this. This is to illustrate how expensive honey can be. You've probably got one of these back in your cupboard back home. £1,500 for a wee pot of honey. But it's for Harrods. So you can, next time you're in London, you might want to get a present and take it home to your family. It's got a nice wooden top. Maybe that justifies the price. And it's Manuka, which is a treasured honey because it's antimicrobial properties. I mentioned Manuka. Manuka is a good example of honey fraud. So 10,000 tons of honey labeled as Manuka are sold worldwide every year. Australia and New Zealand, where Manuka is produced, only produce about 2,500 tonnes of Manuka honey. So even and I'm not good at maths. I was in remedial math in university. And so nobody gives me a calculation to do, but I managed this one. So we have 7,500 tonnes labelled as Manuka that is not Manuka. and I'll pass it on to you.
Okay. So yeah, as Ian was saying, some of the work that I've done at SSERC is work on pollen and identifying pollens in honey. And this is a really nice story that I think relates to that work really well. You'll be familiar, I'm quite sure, with Kew Gardens in London, the really extensive collection of plants that they have. And the flowers that bees visit has a really significant impact on the finished product of the honey. So the aroma, the colour, these are all influenced by the chemicals of the plants that those bees are visiting and the chemicals that they're therefore bringing back and depositing into their honey. A really nice example of this is heather honey. Part of the reason why it takes on that quite distinctive orangey colour that you might be familiar with is some beta-carotene, which is found in heather and also found in carrots, and that contributes that orange colour. So if you are Kew Gardens and you have an extensive and fantastic plant collection, this creates an excellent business opportunity for you, and they've certainly taken good advantage of it. They have quite a number of specialist honeys that they sell as part of their offering to the public, and they charge quite a little bit of money for some of these honeys as well. And some researchers quite a few years ago now decided that this was worth looking into. What exactly was in this honey? What exactly was the pollen that you might find if you analysed it? And what they found is that bees are pretty adventurous, and a bit like me, they don't follow instructions particularly well. So you may place your beehive in the midst of Kew Gardens with your lovely collection of plants around you, but they'll pretty much go wherever they like. And they can fly up to 3 miles as a radius for collecting that pollen. And you might have spotted that the map up there in the top corner, that has Kew Gardens pinpointed in the middle of it. That's just 1 mile of a radius that I put around it, and it covers quite a bit of the Thames. And along the banks of the Thames, there is this invasive plant, this sort of weed essentially, called Himalayan balsam, which is invasive to the UK and not particularly elaborate or fancy, but it turns out the bees had a real love of it. So the Kew Gardens bees were flying right past all of the expensive and exotic plants that were meant to make up this quite elaborate honey, and they were essentially feasting on this weed that was growing on the bank of the Thames, and that was what you found in quite significant numbers within the honey when you did the analysis, which is probably not great for their marketing department, but it certainly makes for quite an interesting little story. And as it turns out, it's a little bit of ironic justice, because part of the reason why Himalayan balsam is invasive to the UK is because it escaped from Kew Gardens when they brought it here about 170 years ago. So they somewhat did it to themselves, unfortunately. This is a little note, mainly for the live stream, actually, for anyone who might watch this recording later. As part of SSERC's 60th anniversary celebrations, which actually are happening this very week, I've put together a little protocol for extracting pollen from honey and for visualising it under a microscope. And so you can do that exact same work, essentially, in a school classroom using these chemicals and using this process. So you can take your honey, you can centrifuge it down to cause the pollen to collect at the bottom, and then you can add various chemical dyes which allow you to visualise different components of the pollen structure. I think these pictures are quite lovely. I took these in the SSERC lab down in Dunfermline. So we have a chemical dye called safranin, which is really good for visualising the outside of the pollen, so the spikes that the pollen relies on to attach on to things like bees. The iodine that you can see in the middle there does a really good job of binding to starch and to sugars that are present inside the body of the seed. And then lastly, that one there, lactophenol cotton blue, is really good for visualising dense, sugary parts of the pollen, like the little germ spores that you can see, the three really intensive blue dots on the side there. So if you happen to be a teacher and you happen to fancy doing some of that work yourself, you can find that online and use it with your classes. Okay, right. When you guys came in, you might have noticed there were some sweets sitting on your chairs, and rightly so. You've all eaten them, I think, already, and that's totally fine. But there was actually a point to it besides just bribing you for the applause at the end, and the point relates to this story. So this is a picture of a frame of honey that was taken from a hive in the north of France, and Ian and I, in fact, took this picture out to schools not too long ago as part of a little workshop, and we asked the kids to sort of guess what it is that causes this really unusual phenomenon, and we got some really good guesses. We had kids saying, well, maybe the flower that the bees are visiting has an impact. There's some sort of pigment and chemistry from the flower. Maybe it's rotted, it's kind of gone off a little bit, and there's some bacteria and fungus that's caused this interesting colour pattern. But actually, it's back to bees not being very good at following orders. So quite nearby to this beehive, there was a sort of chemical processing factory, and what it was doing was it was getting rid of some waste from the the sweet industry, the confectionery industry, and in particular it was the blue dyes. And it turns out that bees had managed to find an open vat of this kind of sugary dye solution and had gotten themselves into it and carried it back to the hive, and as a result they had deposited it into the honey to give it that really distinctive blue colour. So another great example of bees and human beings interacting in ways that you might not otherwise expect. And although that picture is actually one of my favourite photographs in science and is really particularly beautiful, when you actually look at the pot of blue honey, I actually don't know that it is the most appetising thing in the world. M&Ms are probably not going to start a honey line anytime soon on that basis. Back to our male then in that case. So when that male is around 15 to 23 days of age, he's ready to start leaving the hive and going out on what we call mating flights. They don't do this at random. They go to particular areas within the landscape called drone congregation areas. It's kind of like an insect disco. It's a place to go along, to meet other bees, like-minded bees in fact, and there will be some queens there as well. They secrete a pheromone that draws queens into the area, and this is the region in which they will meet and in which they will mate. So they gather very high up in the air, and visiting queens will mate with not just one drone, but with several drones as part of these drone congregation areas. And interestingly, they're not random. They are the same places year in and year out. So bees, both queens and drones, will visit the same locations time and time again, and they'll become established over many, many annual cycles, which is quite a nice thought. Okay, so male bees are particularly well adapted then to play this role. They have to interact with these swarms and try and navigate them, and they're quite chaotic environments. So they have various different physiological adaptations that let them do that really successfully. One of the best examples of that is their eyes. So drones have much bigger compound eyes than queens or workers, and that helps them to spot and to track the movements of a young queen during those mating flights. So they have particularly good eyesight for moving targets like a young queen during a mating flight. And I thought this was worth pointing out because we don't understand everything when it comes to bee physiology, even though we understand bees and have lived alongside bees for a very long time. Bees have hairs on the surface of their eyes and on the perimeter of their eyes as well. And there's some debate in the scientific community as to whether or not these serve as a kind of protection, just simply stopping debris and things from getting into the body of the eye, or whether they are specially evolved to help the bee detect the direction of the wind and to navigate its environment in that particular way. So it's interesting that we're still learning things about animals that we otherwise understand really, really well. So those eyes, there are more of them than you might expect. So bees actually have, honeybees have 5 eyes. They have 3 simple eyes, which are located on the top of their head, and then those 2 large compound eyes that you can see at the front there. Those simple eyes are essentially like simple light sensors. It allows the bee to determine light from dark and to some extent to determine light intensity. So not particularly good at detecting colour or changes in colours, but essentially allowing it to tell where the sunlight is, because bees rely really heavily on the sun for their directionality and for their movement. So these 3 simple eyes that are located at the top of the bee's head are really helpful for allowing it to track its position relative to the sun, and therefore to keep itself moving in the direction that it wants to be moving in. So bees don't see the world in the same way that we see the world. Part of the reason why bees would make particularly terrible drivers is that they can't see red. So honeybees, they don't see the world the same way that we do. They don't see certain colours that we see, but they also see a heck of a lot more than we do in some aspects too. And in particular, what they're very good at spotting is UV spectrum, parts of the spectrum that are ultraviolet. And this is part of the kind of beauty of their evolutionary story. They've evolved alongside flowers to visualize parts of the plant that otherwise aren't visible to us, and they use them essentially as sort of guides or landing strips. So they've evolved alongside flowers and are optimized for finding nectar and pollen by using these ultraviolet guided markers as a way of detecting the plant's presence, and in particular detecting the parts of the plant where the pollen is visible. And there are some really beautiful photographs that you can find online of these essentially landing strips, parts of the plant that to us look perfectly banal and normal, but to a bee are very clear guides and very clear markers for where they'll find the pollen and where they'll find the nectar in their environment. So they're secret signs or secret signals as to where a bee can find a pollen source and a nectar source within its environment. So many people cite academic scholars as part of their work, Harvard professors, things like that. I've got the bee movie to rely on for this particular phenomenon. I just like the quote, if I'm being honest. So according to all known laws of aviation, there is no way that a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground. The bee, of course, flies anyway, because bees don't care what humans think is possible. It is a really true phenomenon. Scientists have spent quite a little bit of time trying to determine how it is that an organism that has quite a substantial body mass, but really quite limited and stumpy wings, is able to pull that off. We reckon we have a good theory, and I think it's interesting. So why is this seemingly impossible phenomenon actually possible? So for a start, their wings are very energetic and very powerful. They can beat up to 200 to 300 times per second. And in 1996, it was discovered that they create tiny vortexes, tiny whirls of air above their wings that can generate lift and can pull the bee up essentially into its environment, essentially exploiting the physics of the circulating air to create an upward pull. And it's quite effective. Bees can fly at up to 15 miles per hour. They can hover like a helicopter. I quite enjoy that with my own hive. You can see them kind of hovering steady above it as they're about to land and descend into the hive. And they can carry their own weight in nectar and pollen. So not only can they fly very, very quickly, very efficiently, but they can also carry significant loads of weight when doing so as well. They really are a really remarkable little creature. And over to yourself, Ian.
In terms of bees and communication, I want to just mention it's a little bit of chemistry of bees. And bees, like other insects, can communicate using chemicals. I won't go over all of the chemicals mentioned here, but you can see there that they're using chemicals for the brood, the babies to communicate with the workers to communicate alarm, for example. There's Ian standing too near the hive, let's get him, things like that. And I was standing next to John's hive, and I don't...
By all means, give that a mention.
And the queen and the drone, particularly the queen, is very important, or uses pheromones in a very useful way in terms of mating. Drones are very good at smelling or detecting those chemicals. Bees don't have noses. If you go away from this lecture with any bit of knowledge, remember bees don't have noses, but instead they have antennae. And they can smell the chemicals in the air on their antennae, but also on their feet. They have receptors on their feet that they can detect chemicals. Drones have bigger antennae than other bees in the hive, bigger than the females, and long segments within the antennae, and it means that they can, their sense of smell, if you like, is much, much better than the other bees. The queen is in control, very much so in the hive, and she uses chemicals to control things. She uses this chemical, which is part of it's called the queen mandibular pheromone. And it's 9-ODA, and I will try and pronounce it 9-oxo-2-decanoic acid. And for the chemists amongst you, or people that have studied chemistry or interested in chemistry, quite a simple little structure at the bottom. It's quite light. It means it can get up into the air. Chemicals need to get up into the air if you're going to smell them. She uses this to control the drone, to attract the drone to her, very important, and I must remember...
It's not mine.
There has been, when I Googled pheromones, I got up a lot of adverts for human pheromone. And this isn't human pheromone, by the way. But I'm reliably told that there isn't such a thing as human pheromone, so don't waste your money. Buy the honey instead. This pheromone attracts drones to the bee, but it doesn't stop there. She uses this pheromone to get the worker bees to do what she wants. She gets them to attend her, to feed her, to groom her. She also uses this pheromone, this chemical, to stop her sisters from developing ovaries to become fertile. She keeps them in their place. She's a powerful lady. I got to thinking, can we smell bee pheromones? I should have asked the beekeeper because they would know these things. But I discovered we can smell some of the bees' pheromones. One of the pheromones that we can smell is the alarm pheromone. So if you get stung by a bee, or if you're working with a hive and you squash some bees, this is the pheromone that's going to be released. And it apparently smells like bananas or pear drops. And that is the chemical that gives you that smell, is ethyl acetate, isopentyl acetate. And we used to have this and some other compounds in the fridge at Robert Gordon's. And every time you open the fridge, you could smell that, like fruit drops, pear drops, they smell. You want to keep bananas and pear drops away from bees, though, because it makes them angry. Another pheromone, Nazanov, apparently it has a lemony scent, and this is used by worker bees to get other worker bees to come to help if they're busy doing something like building the hive. Now, this is here for no other reason, but I thought it was really, really good. And it's that queen bees make sound. Have you ever heard a queen bee? This is what she sounds like.
So, having had a bit of a look at all these different bits of physiology and behaviour, these chemical signals, these mating piping noises that we just heard there, eventually we do have success. So a drone congregation will result in male and female bee finding each other, those big eyes, the chemical attractants. They've helped our young male drone to find his queen. But success comes at a pretty extreme price. It's a pretty tough life being a male bee, to be honest. Drones will die almost immediately after mating. How to say it? They won't remain entirely anatomically intact after the moment. It's maybe the best way I'm going to go for it. The queen, on the other hand, is relatively unbothered by this, and she will go on to mate with 10 to 20 other drones during each mating flight and during each cycle, whereas the male, unfortunately, succumbs almost immediately after the event. However, the queen will then make it back to the hive. She will have sperm in her abdomen that she's just received from the male bee, and this allows her to be extremely reproductive as an organism. Queens can lay up to 2,000 eggs per day. A colony can expand very, very rapidly under the right conditions. If there's enough food in the environment and the temperature's just right, they can really thrive. And this mix of genetic material from the queen and from the drone will help to introduce diversity into the colony, some new traits, and help the offspring to thrive and to be more successful. Beekeepers have cottoned on to this. They've cottoned on increasingly to genetics and to the role that genetics plays. And one of the things that they are beginning to try and introduce into their colonies are queen bees, or potentially male drones, that are very cleanly. So bees will clean each other quite often. And if you can introduce into your hive the genes, if you like, for clean behaviour, that's really helpful for controlling things like mites. If they lick each other, they'll remove dirt and pathogens and germs, and in some cases mites. One of my favourite ways that beekeepers sometimes achieve that, and some of you will probably know this, is actually by dusting the bees down with icing sugar. And because they like the taste, they will then lick the icing sugar off each other, and it sort of promotes cleanly behaviour. It's quite a sweet image to have in your mind. So those eggs will then begin to mature. So eggs will hatch into larvae after about 3 days, and they're fed, as Ian mentioned, this really protein-rich royal jelly. All of them get that, just to get them going initially, to give them lots of nutrition and to maximise their chances of success. Evolution is pretty wily like this, and it's obviously deduced that if you give all of the bees the good stuff in the first few days, then they have a very good chance of making it and surviving into being adults and not sort of passing away as larvae in the cells. The workers and the drones, however, they're moved on to the more traditional and standard honey that's present within the hive, and it's just the queen larvae that will continue to receive that royal jelly. And that will give her not only the nutrition that she needs to become a bigger and larger bee and a more metabolically productive bee in a sense, with all that laying of eggs that she has to do, but it also gives her some chemical signals that actually will promote her to become a queen bee. So it gives her the kind of signalling molecules that are required to actually promote the act of becoming a queen. And this happens basically continuously in the hive environment. So worker larvae will get up to 800 or even more than 800 meals a day as part of their daily routine. They're constantly being fed by nurse bees that are wandering over the frames of the hive. So yeah, it's a hard life being a male bee, as I said, but we just covered, and we won't go back to it, what happened to the male bee who was successful in his mating endeavours. But even the ones that were not successful, I'm afraid, don't get off easy. So any drones that do survive the autumn will then be evicted from the hive by the remainder of the workers. As I mentioned, these male bees are not, they're not productive. They don't bring back pollen, they don't bring back sugar from the surrounding plants. And as a result, they're not really of any use to the hive over the autumn, when there won't be any autumn and winter, when there won't be any mating activity going on. So the male bees are then dragged to the hive entrance. They are evicted from the hive, and if they're lucky, they will succumb to the cold environment and they'll pass away from the cold. If they're not lucky, and if they try and regain entry back into the hive, they will have their wings nibbled off for good measure, just to make sure that they can't re-enter and can't come back in to the hive environment. So it really is a hard life being a male bee, unfortunately. The story never ends pleasantly, and now you can see why we didn't have a kind of cartoon bee that we decided to follow the life cycle of, because it gets a little bit dark towards the end, unfortunately. So how does one find love as a honeybee? Well, they do it the same way that we all do, by overcoming challenges. So they have to grow up fast in a busy hive environment. They have to learn to navigate by both the sun and the sky. They have to compete with thousands of other drones and worker bees in the air for pollen and plant material and for mating opportunities. They have to rely on their sharp eyes and their keen senses to find their partners. And then they have to pay the ultimate price, unfortunately, for what we've euphemistically called a single moment of success. It's a story of perseverance, and you guys have certainly persevered with us tonight, so we really appreciate that. And thank you so much.
Thank you.